The Florida Panthers fell in Game 4, but still have a 3-1 series lead over the Edmonton Oilers and are one win away from the Stanley Cup. Armando Velez of Locked On Florida Panthers joins us to discuss what it'll take to get over the hump. All that and more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show a familiar face now to Locked On NHL fans, the host of Locked On Florida Panthers, Armando Velez. And Armando, I want to ask you this. Obviously, 8-1, not what you expected going into Saturday night's Game 4, but is it almost easier for this team that the game was so one-sided?
I believe so, because when I think about how this game went for the Florida Panthers versus the first three, I mean, Game 1, the team was giving up quite a few odd man rushes, but Sergei Bobrovsky was Sergei Bobrovsky in that game. But I mean, for the Panthers, it was a lot more than just the odd man rushes for them. I mean, for the Edmonton Oilers, the puck support was just so great after they won their fair share of board battles in their own end. That's really what it came down to for them, also fighting off the Florida Panthers forecheck. But when it's crazy because one of the goals in the third period on the entry by Corey Perry and Connor McDavid, they didn't even show a slow-mo, but the Panthers hesitated to challenge for offside in that. But the score was so wide open. The Edmonton Oilers were just winning by a wide margin, and so I was wondering whether Paul Maurice didn't want to challenge that, because of the fact to let a loss like this marinate. So with the 2-day gap, with it going back to Sunrise, that it could just fire them up when they're ready to go back home.
And what was so different about Game 4 as compared to the first three games, other than the obvious? I mean, Bobrovsky didn't have his A game in Game 4, but what else was different about it?
The superstars for the Edmonton Oilers were able to finish. That was really the biggest difference in this one. I mean, all the conversation about Zach Hyman, Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl not getting on the board. I mean, you think about this. I mean, the depth scores were the guys who were getting on the board, like a Matthias Ekholm, Jan Mark, Dylan Holloway, and those are the guys who are getting on the score sheet for the Oilers, and for Connor McDavid, now he was finishing on his chances. I mean, multi-assist game. I mean, he's now 2 points away from getting to 40 points in the postseason. So that's really what it came down to, is that the stars were able to finish. So thankfully for the Panthers, this is a different conversation now versus had they lost Game 1 too, because if you're coming off of this and it's tied 2-2, the alarms might be going off even more.
What is the attitude in the Panthers locker room? I mean, they're up 3-0 in the series. You have 4 chances to win the series. Now there's 3. How are they taking? What's the reaction to this loss?
I really love what Alexander Barkov said after the game, where he said, we either win or we learn. So it's just I think the vibe for the locker room for the Panthers is that they're actually in a really good place, I feel. And Paul Maurice also talks a lot about emotional advantage for other teams on what happens whenever a team's back's against the walls. And he also talks about that from the regular season of teams who are on the bubble of trying to make the postseason too, or even teams who are facing elimination. The emotional advantage of the Oilers and the Panthers, it was a wide margin, but now after that, the way they lost, it's a little bit closer now for the Panthers, now that they got a message kind of sent to them after that.
up to 3 games remaining. 2 of them would be in South Florida. What would it mean to the fan base and to the team to be able to win the series at home?
It would mean everything because, I mean, with the Panthers going through a gauntlet of ownership, relocation rumors, and also for them to get this series at home and just to see the growth of hockey where there's already that practice facility in East Broward County for the practice facility, and also for drop-in hockey, learn to play, everything there. And also the fact that there's also another rink being built up north in Palm Beach Gardens. I mean, with the Florida Panthers winning the Stanley Cup, that would just mean so much for registration on the youth level too. Kids being brought to games and saying, I want to do that too. So that's really the inspiring. That's the inspiration that a Stanley Cup run would be for the Florida Panthers.
And then fans who've been following this team for 3 decades, being able to see the Stanley Cup raised in their own building would have to be special.
Yeah, and to think about what the team's inception being in downtown Miami too, and then the move to Sunrise, and trying to find their identity, and then the whole talk about players wanting to come here to retire versus actually wanting to contend too. That's another thing for it is changed to this one thing that Matthew Caldwell, the president of the Florida Panthers, talks about, is to be a destination franchise. Bill Zito also preaches that. They also preach about the region of Broward County. They want to be from the Everglades to the Palm Beaches. It's like widespread that they want to be for what they're building for the team. So this team has really come a long way.
So what are the keys for the Panthers to end this series in 5 games? What do they need to do to win this series right now?
It's really comes down to just being able to get the Oilers defense out of their game. I mean, especially in game 3 for the Panthers, where you can look at all those goals that the Panthers scored, and it was because of the Edmonton Oilers blue line fighting off the forecheck, slower to pucks for the Panthers too, and getting them pucks deep, because these are 2 contrasting styles, with the Edmonton Oilers getting speed through the neutral zone, while the Panthers are a team that likes to dump and chase and go to battle there and actually creates chances off the forecheck. So thankfully, with the Panthers getting last change and Alexander Barkov being able to match up against McDavid, that's a thing for the Panthers, that they're hoping to really get those lines going. And first and third line have been really going. I mean, Matthew Tkachuk only has 1 goal in the last 15 games. He needs to get going a little bit. We still have to get killer instinct Matthew Tkachuk there. Him and Bennett, that line has to get going, and they haven't gotten any contributions from the fourth line too. But that's not really a big expectation for the team. So maybe look more to that second line to bring more contributions to the Florida Panthers in Game 5, because we've seen Matthew Tkachuk take over games. So hopefully we can see it end at home.
1 win away from the first Stanley Cup in franchise history. Obviously, we still don't know how it's going to end, but assuming the Panthers win it, who do you think should be the Conn Smythe Trophy winner?
It's changed so many times with performances. I mean, when Sergei Bobrovsky got chased in Game 4, I didn't think that it was to his fault of those 5 goals. I mean, just the way that the Oilers were just getting multiple odd man rushes. But I think of it multiple ways of who's contributing. And it's between Alexander Barkov and Sergei Bobrovsky. And here's the thing: if Sergei Bobrovsky got a shutout in Game 1, but even if he gives up 8 goals, but then has a clincher in a shutout along with it, I don't see a reason why it wouldn't be him, because of the way he's able to bounce back. But also, if Alexander Barkov gets like 3 or 4 points in a clincher too, then you have to consider him too. But it's between those guys. So it's I'm gonna say the odds have shifted a little bit with the performance of Sergei Bobrovsky in Game 4, but it's really close, I would say.
All right. Well, Armando, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
They can find the podcast anywhere they listen to podcasts. and on YouTube. And they could also follow the show account on X and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And if they want to follow me personally, they could follow me at MondoMan12.
All right, Armando, always a pleasure. Thanks so much. And I know you'll have all things Panthers covered throughout the playoffs and beyond.
Thank you so much, Gil, as always.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, the Stanley Cup Finals, and more. You can bet it all on FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you could use to bet on everything from the Finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park. Hockey fans, use your knowledge of the NHL to bet on the Conn Smythe Trophy winners, the playoffs MVP, who's going to win Game 5 back in South Florida, or who's going to win the Stanley Cup. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon, FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book.